Good evening, everyone. I want to invite you to tonight's talk on the nutrition of cancer, what you didn't know about food and its effects on cancer. I am so grateful that you are here. If you are interested and you would like to reply in the comments to this video with your email address, I would be happy to send you a free flyer that has to do with some of the things that we're talking about tonight. It will provide some recipes that will help you shift to eating in the way that we're going to discuss this evening. So go ahead and comment in that if you are interested. So a little bit about who I am. My name is Katie Barngrover, and I am a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, which just means that I use lab work and personalized protocols in order to help people improve their sleep and their overall health. Now, I have been passionate about health research since about 2000, the year 2000, where I was headed to medical school. I wanted to become a family practice physician. I wanted to return to my hometown, my small town in Wyoming, in order to help my community members get well. But in the process of applying to medical school, I realized that I was going to be trained to help people with acute situations, things like heart attacks and broken bones, but also trained to manage chronic problems with medications and or surgeries. And I didn't want to manage chronic problems. I wanted to help people get healthy and well. And I realized that that wasn't going to be the training that I was going to receive as a physician. So I didn't go to medical school. I spent the next 22 years working my way through insurance, where I taught people how to understand what it was that they were purchasing, into teaching education, that process of which I already have my bachelor's degree in mathematics, and then I ended up with my master's degree in education through that process, as well as a national board certification in teaching. And so I was helping to teach my students to appreciate and use mathematics effectively. But I was always fascinated with health during that time. Every book that I read, or almost every book, podcast that I listened to, workshops that I went to, they were all dealing with health. So I have been a student of health and wellness for over 20 years. Now, my goals for this talk are threefold. The first one is that I want to touch on the myths in the nutrition space. The second one is that I want to talk about what cancer needs in order to survive. And then the third one is I want to discuss how do you help support your body in order to overcome cancer, or at least have a better shot at it. So let's talk about the myths first. We are going to be discussing the USDA and American Heart Association food guidelines. The myth is that those are the best guidelines for us and that that's what we should be eating. The second myth is that fat is bad for us and that lean meat is the best type of meat for us to eat if we eat meat at all. The third myth is that vegetable oils are healthier than butter or animal fats, also known as saturated fats. The fourth is that sugar is okay in small amounts and that everything is okay in moderation. And the fifth one is that a calorie is a calorie. And when calories in equals calories out, we maintain health and weight. So let's start with myth number one, that the food guidelines, the USDA food guidelines, are best for me. Now, the American Heart Association dominates the nutrition conversation with our physicians. And this is a bit of a problem because the physicians use the Heart Association's guidelines to help guide their patients, but the guidelines have a lot of flaws in them. First of all, the Heart Association and the USDA use epidemiological studies in order to justify the guidelines that they're recommending. However, epidemiological studies can never show causation. They only ever show association. And so the trouble with this is that association simply means that two things move in the same direction. Like this graph, for example. This graph shows margarine consumption on the bottom, and then it shows the divorce rate in Maine along the y-axis. Well, it seems quite logical that how much margarine you consume would not predict whether or not you're going to get divorced in Maine. But that would be what this graph implies. It says that these two things trend together. And if we are using this epidemiological study, meaning comparing two sets of data to see if they match up in their trend, to justify that one causes the other, we would be quite silly here, right? But that's what's going on with the guidelines. So things like fruits and vegetables lower the risk of disease, and therefore eating fruits and in vegetables cause disease to be lower. That seems to be a staple in today's society. However, there are some studies that actually show that eating fruits and vegetables can increase the risk of disease. So all I'm trying to say with this is that epidemiological studies definitely show us when things are trending in the same direction, but we cannot use them to justify our recommendations because we might be asking people to change behaviors towards or against things that aren't actually connected, like this margarine consumption and the divorce rate in Maine. So what are the guidelines actually? Well, the first guideline is to focus on nutrient-dense foods and beverages, in other words, to eat whole foods. This one I agree with. The second one is to eat low fat or lean proteins and low fat or fat-free dairy. These are quite a terrible idea, but we're going to talk about why a little bit later. The third one is to limit calories from sugar. Now, our goal should be to eliminate calories from sugar, not just to limit them. And I will go into why on that later as well. The fourth one is to limit saturated fat. Now, this is really quite a terrible idea. And I am definitely going to spend some time on this one later as well. The fifth one is to reduce sodium. Now, the trouble with this one is that if you are not eating processed foods, this is also a terrible idea. Salt, which is more than just sodium, is critical for our cells to communicate. You might feel tired, have headaches or muscle weaknesses, nausea, vomiting, irregular heartbeats, confusion, lightheadedness, changes in blood pressure, numbness and tingling, or even seizures if you don't get enough salt. Now, if you're eating a highly processed foods, then you probably get plenty of salt. But the recommendation should apply to everyone. And if you are eating whole foods like they recommend, and so you're not eating a lot of processed foods, then you shouldn't be reducing your sodium intake. You should actually be increasing it. And the sixth one, I think, is just really quite silly. It says to customize and enjoy your food and beverage choices. Well, in theory, that's a great idea. Except for that, what does customize mean? Is soda a customized beverage? Because it's full of sugar and other chemicals that are really bad for our bodies. Are chips a customized food? Because they're often full of unhealthy fats that push us towards disease. And so they tell us to eat whole foods, limit calories from sugar, don't eat a lot of fat, reduce salt, and then enjoy what it is that you eat. But they don't really give you a very good description on how. So let's go into first where the guidelines came from. They debuted in 1980, and they were published in order to help Americans make healthier choices. We were in an epidemic of cardiovascular disease, and they were desperately trying to figure out why and how to help the public get better. So they thought if we taught people how to eat, health would improve. Thus, the guidelines. Our current version was published in December of 2020, and it was recommended by 13 professionals. We will continue to use these guidelines until the end of 2025. So let's go back for a second. It turns out that most Americans follow the guidelines, but are we better off for having followed the USDA guidelines in general as a population? Because clearly, if we're following the guidelines, they are having the opposite effect on health. We are living shorter, sicker, and more diseased lives. We spend more on healthy food and healthy living than most other countries, but we also spend more on sick care and medical costs than those same countries. So the guidelines are not doing us any favors if we really are following the guidelines. And lastly, the guidelines, it turns out, are very easily influenced. So here are the 13 professionals that made up the 2020 Guideline Committee. Okay. Between all 13 of these, they have received funding from these following companies. Now, I am not saying that these are evil people who are out to deceive the public. But what I am saying is that guidelines that are built from a group of people who have received a lot of funding from pharma and big food from these companies should be questioned for their validity. Is it likely that these people would publish guidelines that say to stay away from the very foods that their funders make? Or would they publish guidelines that say to stay away from foods whose very consumption leads to the poor health that the pharmaceutical companies are trying to cure with their medications? It seems reasonable to me to question the influence of these companies on the guidelines, especially when the guidelines aren't supported by science. Yes, you heard me right. The guidelines are not research-based. Dr. Edward Arsher published a paper showing the lack of scientific research used to support the guidelines. And he also noted that the government acknowledges that the guidelines are not based on research, but that the government published the guidelines anyway. They just didn't tell anybody. So where are the guidelines wrong then? Well, the first guideline says to eat whole, real foods. And this guideline I agree with. The closer we get food to its original state, the more nutritious it is. The more heavily we process it, the more nutrients are lost and the more toxins that are added. But guideline 2 says we need to eat lean protein and that fat is bad for us. We're going to go ahead and discuss low-fat and no-fat milk here too, since this conversation is really about fat. This is so insufficient for our health. Protein is very good for us. The body needs amino acids, and they come from protein. And we use these amino acids to build all of the structures in the body. Now, technically, we can get some of these amino acids from plants, but if you're not strategic about how you eat your plants, you will be missing key amino acids because there is not a single plant that contains all of the amino acids except perhaps soy, and soy has a whole bunch of other problems as well. Now, protein is not the part of the recommendation that I have a problem with. The part that I do have a problem with is the lean part, the low-fat part. We need protein, but we also need fat. Animal fats are our most healthy form of fats. If we have healthy metabolisms, when our glucose and our glucagon stores run out, we can switch over to using ketones without a problem. Our body makes ketones from fat, and they've been doing it since birth, although a lot of us are out of practice. Now, I am not talking about ketoacidosis here. Ketoacidosis is a life-threatening condition in type 1 diabetics where the sugars in the bloodstream get too high because there is not enough insulin to help push that sugar out of the blood. I am talking about ketones, okay? And I'll come back to what those are in just a second. Our body needs proteins and fat. Proteins, like we already said, become the amino acids, and they are used to make every structure in the body. Fats are used to create cell membranes. The fats are made up of fatty acids, and those fatty acids are used to build every one of the 30+ trillion cells in our body. They are also used for energy when we convert them into ketones. Carbohydrates produce energy, nothing else, just energy. But the body can actually get all of the energy that it needs from fats and proteins. Ketones are a healthy byproduct of the digestion of fats. But our body won't make ketones if there is sugar around, or if the fats that we have in our body are filled with toxins. If there is no usable fat in the body sends out a 911 and causes us to crave and therefore eat carbohydrates in order to quickly get our blood sugar up and produce energy for the body. The quickest way for the body to get energy would be for the body to actually break down the fats in the body. But if only toxic fats exist, or if our bodies are out of practice using ketones because we habitually have high glucose present in the body is going to resist turning those fats into ketones and is going to demand more carbohydrates. Being hangry is a sign that we aren't burning ketones and that we may have metabolic damage. Damage keeps our body from burning its own fat. And so we get hangry, causing our body to scream at us and tell us to eat carbohydrates now, crave that Snickers bar, eat that handful of candy, whatever. When we eat carbohydrates, our sugar goes up, then it crashes, and then we crave sugar again. While we are in a hangry state of low blood sugar, and we have no ketones available and no healthy fat, or we're out of practice using those fats, we can have symptoms. These symptoms are not going to help us live happy, healthy lives. So when body, let me try that again. When the body has fat in our diet, or we have healthy fat stored on the body, and our body is conditioned to use that healthy fat, we will switch over to using fat as fuel when the glucose runs out in the body. It turns out that ketones are actually the brain's favorite food. When the brain is given a choice between using glucose for fuel or using ketones for fuel, the brain chooses ketones every single time. And so it is really good for our bodies to be in ketosis. But by avoiding eating fat or by eating low fat, we are actually reducing the fuel available to turn into ketones. Despite what we've been told, fat in our food does not turn into fat on our body or in our arteries. Turns out that sugar and highly processed carbohydrates do, and almost immediately. Limited amounts of sugar from our diet gets stored as glucagon in our liver and in our muscles. Our body puts it there to help us if we have a fight or flight response. It's immediate energy available for fight or flight. But anything that can't be stored in the liver or in the muscles gets shunted to fat cells almost at once. Now, why is this important in a discussion about cancer? Because cancer hates ketones. Cancer cells feed almost primarily off of glucose, but they can't use ketones as a fuel source. Without glucose, or one other substance that I'll talk about a little bit later, the cancer cells starve. Did you know that when a doctor is trying to find cancer in a body using scans, they feed you a sugary substance laced with a marker that can be seen in the picture, because the cancer cells take up that sugar faster than your healthy cells, making the location of the tumors visible on the scans. They feed your cancer cells sugar in order to make them visible. Isn't that fascinating? We'll come back to this later, but for right now, let's stick to the conversation about fat. So isn't saturated fat in meat bad? Well, the lean meat recommendation comes from the old and wrong idea that saturated fat is bad. Saturated fat is often thought of as cholesterol, and they are not technically the same thing. But for the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to use those terms interchangeably. The idea is that saturated fat leads to heart disease. Now, I could spend a whole bunch of hours on why this is false, but I want to talk about 2 quick points. First, large epidemiological studies and meta-analyses have confirmed the lack of correlation between cholesterol you eat and the cholesterol in your blood. Now, wait, you say. You just told me that epidemiological studies are bad. Well, actually, what I said was that epidemiological studies cannot prove causation. So just because 2 things trend in the same direction does not mean that one causes the other. However, if 2 things do not trend in the same direction or trend at the same rate in opposite directions, they cannot be causative. One cannot cause the other. So they have to have a trend that matches in order for one to cause the other one to happen. And so that's where epidemiological studies are great. We can look at data and say, wait, these 2 pieces of data or these 2 sets of data travel in completely opposite directions and they don't appear to be connected at all. And therefore, one does not cause changes in the other one. So epidemiological studies are really good for that. And in this case, the epidemiological studies show that that cholesterol in your diet and cholesterol in your blood do not trend in the same direction at all. So what that means is that saturated fat does not turn into the cholesterol that is on your lab results that worry your doctor. It also means that you are not going to get heart disease by eating saturated fat. Now, doctors Johnny Bowden and Stephen Sinatra, who wrote a book called The Cholesterol Myth, say that cholesterol does not cause heart disease. Cholesterol levels, as currently measured, do not even predict heart disease, let alone cause it. So just like the guidelines, many people who have pushed this idea that saturated fat is bad have ties to pharmaceutical companies who sell the statins used to decrease cholesterol. The government even said in 2015 that cholesterol is no longer a nutrient for concern for overconsumption. But again, they didn't advertise it. In addition to saturated fat not being bad for you, all of your cells are made of fat. Do you want your cells to look like this? Difficult to maintain their structure, which reduces their ability to function and to get rid of toxins? Or do you want them to look like this? To move like nature intended, bending, shifting, pulling good things in and pushing the bad ones out. The healthier our cells, the healthier our bodies. The dietary recommendations say that we should eat low-fat everything, which means not enough building blocks for healthy cells. What it usually means is that we've replaced healthy fats like butter, lard, tallow, and egg yolks with unhealthy and extremely toxic fats like vegetable oils, things like canola, soybean, etc. Contrary to popular belief, low-carb, high, healthy fat diets are not bad for your health. They may even ensure that you stay healthy. So now let's do a quick lesson on cholesterol. Cholesterol is necessary for hormones. Pregnenolone, DHEA, progesterone, testosterone, estrogen, vitamin D, which is actually a hormone, not a vitamin, bile acids, cortisol, and more. All of these hormones and more regulate important processes in the body, like our fight-flight state, our rest and digest state, and many others. Also, cholesterol is a very powerful antioxidant, and it's an antioxidant that our bodies can actually use. Many plants are touted as being high in antioxidants, but the availability of those antioxidants from plants to our bodies is actually quite questionable. Plants protect their resources since they can't get up and run away. They bind those resources up in fiber, which we can't digest, or they hide those resources behind toxins, which defeat the purpose of taking the antioxidant in the first place. But cholesterol is an antioxidant that our bodies make, and it is one that we can also use from animal sources. Even though we're not growing anymore, our bodies still need lots of cholesterol to build and repair healthy cells. Protein and healthy fats, which are nourishing foods, can reverse diabetes, alleviate a variety of mental health issues, and even stave off cancer. Our brain is particularly rich in cholesterol as it's a vital part of the cell membranes in the brain, and it plays a critical role in the transmission of neurotransmitters. And in the brain, cholesterol accounts for 1/4 of all of the cholesterol in the body, so our brains use a lot of cholesterol. When cholesterol is lowered by drugs or by seed oils, cellular communication is impaired, and cognition and memory are significantly affected. Serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter that deals with the feelings of relaxation, well-being, and satisfaction, has receptors that are anchored in cholesterol-rich lipid rafts in cell membranes. Not enough cholesterol, not enough serotonin getting into our cells. Cholesterol also plays a really big role in fighting infections. A study done over a 15-year period of time found that people who had low cholesterol were much more likely to be admitted to the hospital with infectious disease than those who had high cholesterol. Is that what we want for our health? So on to myth number 3. We were talking about unhealthy fats, and we're going to keep that conversation here, but the myth was that all fats are unhealthy. And that's actually not true. Only some fats are unhealthy. Now, I've mentioned this several times, but there is ample research to show that seed oils contribute to metabolic dysfunction, which is just energy production and utilization issues. Seed oils are a recent and toxic addition to our food system. We've only been eating them for the past 100 years of our evolution. And they came from companies who produced oil lamps, who needed a new market to sell their oil to when electricity took off and people stopped buying oil for their homes. Procter & Gamble had cottonseed oil that they discovered they could make semi-solid by hydrogenating it, and it would look a lot like lard, which was the most common fat of the era. This hydrogenated oil was sold to housewives as a less expensive fat than lard, and they called it Crisco. Now, the hydrogenation process of seed oils leads to lots of inflammation in our bodies. And that inflammation, that chronic inflammation, leads to disease. This image shows an experiment with rats. The one on the left was fed bleached cottonseed oil, and the one on the right was fed butter. The butter rat grew at a normal rate. The cottonseed oil rat was stunted, suffered hair loss and emaciation, and eventually developed a pretty serious condition of the eyes. So one of the problems with seed oils is how much they oxidize, which is another word for turning rancid. I want you to think of oxidation like broken glass. It tears up, cuts up whatever it touches. Unsaturated fatty acids in vegetable oils are much more easily damaged by high heat, and therefore they are much more susceptible to oxidation and to the process of free radicals. They enter the body already broken, and they tear up the body. Companies have to deodorize and bleach these oils in order to cover up how rancid they are because they smell and taste awful. Now, saturated fats have benefits and not so many detriments. They don't oxidize like seed oils, for one. Butter is one of our few dietary sources of butyric acid, which is one of the most beneficial short chain fats that we can consume. It serves as food for colon cells. It helps protect against colon cancer. It fights oxidative stress, and it reduces inflammation. Coconut oil, which is a saturated fat, but it is filled with medium chain fatty acids, known as MCTs, if you've heard that buzzword these days. And these MCTs head straight to the liver for energy, reducing the likelihood that they will be stored as fat for later. So saturated fats don't cause the problems that polyunsaturated fats do, like vegetable oils. Another issue with seed oils is the linoleic acid content. Now, our body needs linoleic acid and alpha-linoleic acid to be healthy, to make healthy cells. But what we don't need is more than 3 or 4% of our total fats being these two types of fats. Too much linoleic acid, or alpha-linoleic acid for that matter, affects the structures of our cells and of our organelles, one of those organelles being mitochondria, which, remember, is the powerhouse of the cell. And when they affect these, they cause dysfunction. Now, here's a chart about the content of linoleic acid in some of the most commonly used fats. And thank you to Dr. Knobbe, who wrote the book called Ancestral Diet Revolution for this table. So what I'm suggesting is that you shift your fat consumption to more fat in your diet, but that you make sure you're shifting it to more healthy fats and stay away from seed oils, which are fats high in linoleic acid. Now, you'll notice here that these are, in the main, animal fats, aside from the coconut oil and the palm oil. But those are two oils that have been used in humans, that humans have used for a long, long time. Olive oil also has been used for a long, long time, and it can be low in linoleic acid content. The rest of these get very, very high. Now, you'll notice lard is over here, and that is because pigs are monogastric animals that don't break down the toxins in the corn and soy. So if they're corn and soy fed, they end up with a higher concentration of linoleic acid. But if they are traditionally fed, ancestrally raised, then they have the right ratio of linoleic acid to other fats in their bodies. Beef fed corn and soy does a much better job of breaking down those fats than pigs do. So even if beef is not grass-fed all the way through, the fat is still significantly more healthy than that of any of these over here. So if this list is a little bit daunting, I borrowed a list from Dr. Kate Shanahan, who wrote the book called Dark Calories, and she calls these 8 oils the hateful 8. She says these are the worst 8. If you get overwhelmed by that last list, get rid of these 8 as your first priority. So how toxic are seed oils really? Well, our bodies will clear out toxins from tobacco within 6 months to 1 year of quitting, if that damage hasn't already killed the tissue. But since our bodies uptake fats into our cellular structures, it can actually take 3 years for the toxins in the seed oils to be eliminated from the body. Did you ever think French fries would be worse than tobacco? They are from a metabolic health perspective. Now, I'm not saying go start smoking or chewing, but I do hope that you'll look at French fries differently. So back to the myth that fat becomes fat in the body and clogs our arteries. But I'm going to start by talking about sugar. I want you to keep in mind that to the body, carbohydrates and sugar, which is a sweetener, are the same thing. Both of those, when they're broken down in the body, become glucose. The body will turn both fats and carbohydrates into fat storage to use for energy later if we eat more of either one of them than we need. But it's a whole lot easier for the body to turn carbohydrates into fats because carbohydrates are single use. Who can tell exactly how many bites of a Snickers bar we need to eat in order to fuel the body with the right amount of energy without having any extra? It's really hard. And that's the only use that sugar has in the body is for energy. The body works really hard to get rid of excess sugars and carbohydrates from the blood because it is dangerous. This is where ketoacidosis comes in. Too much sugar in the blood creates ketoacidosis or results in ketoacidosis. So the body will store glucose as fat as quickly as it can in order to protect itself from the damage that sugar causes. This happens by the body pumping insulin out. The pancreas pumps out the insulin, which forces the sugar out of the blood and into the cells. But if we keep eating carbohydrates and sugars at high levels, the cells eventually can't take in any more sugar. The pancreas says we still have too much sugar in the blood, so send out more insulin. So basically, the pancreas starts shouting at the cells to take up the glucose. But the cells are ignoring the insulin signals. And when they start ignoring the insulin signals, this becomes what we call insulin resistance. How much fat you gain after a meal depends entirely on how much insulin is released. The higher the insulin level, the easier it is to convert that insulin to fat. Eat enough sugar and carbohydrates over time, and you will become insulin resistant, which is a direct pathway to all kinds of diseases. Now, insulin is anti-inflammatory in the right amounts, but too much insulin becomes inflammatory. Studies have demonstrated that diets constructed from protein and plenty of fibrous vegetables send satiety hormones sailing upward, while conventional food pyramid diets, which are high in grains, fruits, and vegetables, which are all types of carbohydrates, drive up the very hormones that raise insulin and fat storage. So eating gobs of processed carbohydrates and sugars puts you on a train to insulin resistance and to disease. If you can walk straight at a wall and your belly touches the wall before any other part of your body, there's a really good chance that insulin is an issue for you. So myth number 4, sugar is okay in moderation. First, some background. Sugar is made up of 2 substances, glucose and fructose, in a ratio of 1:1 or 50-50. In digestion, glucose goes right into the bloodstream, and then it goes into our cells, fat or otherwise. But fructose goes right to the liver. In addition, fructose increases appetites because it is devoid of nutritional value. Once you think micronutrients or key building blocks in our cells, fructose doesn't have any of those. Fructose is metabolized almost immediately, and it is a major cause of fat accumulation in the liver, which is a condition called fatty liver disease. This used to show up in only alcoholics, but now it's in everyone, including in our kids. Fat in the liver leads to insulin resistance as well. Some studies conducted by an MD in Switzerland by the name of Luc Tappy revealed that feeding humans a daily dose of fructose equal to 8 to 10 cans of soda produced insulin resistance and elevated triglycerides in just a few days. Hopefully, most of us aren't drinking 8 to 10 cans of soda in a day. But when I was a teacher, I would notice in the hallways that most of our teens are drinking at least 3 or 4. Now, the adult body can manage 1 teaspoon of sugar, which is 4 grams of sugar, circulating in the body at one time. It takes 1.5 to 2 hours for the body to process these consumed sugars. So we shouldn't be eating more than 4 grams of sugar every 2 hours at the most. While our body is trying to process these extra sugars and carbs, those sugars and carbohydrates are causing glycation in the body, which is gumming up the works. They are inserting sticky molecules in places that they don't belong. To give you an idea of how little 4 grams is, 1 serving of goldfish crackers, which is 55 crackers, has 19 grams of carbohydrates. A 4-gram serving of goldfish is only 11 crackers. How many of you eat only 11 crackers in one sitting? This means that 1 serving per the label is handing the adult body 15 more grams than we can handle at one time, which is causing the body to store that as fat and causing sticky glycation damage in your body. Add to that that you're hungry again an hour or 2 later if the crackers even cured your hunger. Remember, it's easier to get energy out of fat if your fat is not toxic, and if you are accustomed to using it. But if neither of those things are true, then it's easier to get energy out of your sugar. One pouch of Yoplait Go-Gurt is actually worse than the goldfish crackers. One tube has 26 grams of carbohydrates, with 17 of those coming straight from sugar. That is 22 more grams than the adult can handle at one time. You would have to stop eating a Go-Gurt at 1/6 of a pouch to stay within the limits of what your body can handle. And who does that? Even worse than Go-Gurt or goldfish, though, is drinking your carbohydrates or sugar. One surefire way to stoke a sugar addiction and overeat is to drink carbohydrates. 1 cup of orange juice contains 27 to 36 grams of sugar, which is the same as eating 3 to 4 large oranges, but it's not nearly as filling because there's not much fiber or no fiber in the orange juice. You should never or rarely drink your sugar. Not in soda, not in fruit juice, not in rehydration juices like Gatorade. Don't fall for the 0 grams of sugar drinks either. Fake sweeteners like aspartame, maltodextrin, and dextrose are harmful in many other ways, even if they don't cause an insulin spike. In our house, we don't have dessert except for special occasions, things like birthdays and some holidays. We don't drink juice or sodas or Gatorade at home, and we rarely drink them away from home. Sometimes my husband and I feel like the sugar Nazis, but it really makes a big difference in how we feel and how our kids behave when we reduce sugar to a rare occasion. So time to circle back to glycation. Remember that glycation is happening with sugar when there's more sugar in the body than the body can process at one time. A simple example of glycation is wrinkles. Excess blood sugar sticks to the most abundant protein in the body called collagen. When collagen gets sticky, its shape gets contorted, and that leads to wrinkles. Now, sugar doesn't just stick to collagen. Oxidative stress from sugar reduces the ability to make collagen, which is needed for support in cells. Collagen-deficient cells can be seen in lumpy cellulite fat. Another place sugar gums up the work is acne. Studies have shown that individuals with acne have higher insulin levels than those without. Also, people with acne have been shown to have a higher burden of oxidative stress and mitochondrial damage. This directly impacts your ability to create and use energy. Remember the broken glass analogy? When fructose enters the body in high levels, it depletes ATP, which is the body's energy unit, in the cell, and it generates uric acid as a byproduct, which causes oxidative stress and mitochondrial dysfunction. Are you struggling with acne? What are you eating? Another study showed that every additional 18 milligrams per deciliter of fasting glucose that we increased in the body was associated with a 37% increased rate of developing depression. We have an epidemic of depression in our society. Perhaps it's related to our food. Now, I'm not saying that our food is causing it or is the only cause of it, but certainly proper nutrients would help. How about migraines, fatigue, sinusitis, low tolerance to pain? All of these are linked to higher glucose levels and oxidative stress in the body. Tension headaches? These are linked to excessive peaks and valleys in blood sugar. Here's a list of conditions that are linked to poor energy production or oxidative stress. Now I know, limiting sugar is hard. Remember that our myth was that sugar is okay in moderation. But the trouble with limiting calories from sugar is that sugar makes it impossible to actually do that. Sugar is the #1 food with addictive potential. And when we mix that sugar with salt, fat, and flavors in more quantities than nature could actually ever produce, which is the case for most ultra-processed foods, we've created products that light up the dopamine and opioid pathways in the brain. These are the same pathways that are activated by recreational drugs. The bottom line is, don't be tricked into thinking that sugar is fine in moderation. Just a little might not do as much damage as a lot. The caveat is that most of us can't stop at just a little. Dwight Lundell, who's an MD, and he wrote a book called Cure for Heart Disease, says that high sugar intake trains our brain's reward centers to make us eat more and more of it. Remember that to the body, all sources of carbohydrates become glucose, which is also known as sugar in the body. The idea of moderation is great in theory, but what if we applied it to other things? Would you have a little cocaine because everything is okay in moderation? How about a little bit of methamphetamine? Of course not. These substances are drugs, and we know it. They are addictive drugs that make the body respond in perhaps desirable ways at the moment, but they are detrimental to health over the long term. Sugar and ultra-processed foods are just as addictive as many drugs on the market, but we let ourselves have access to them whenever and however much we want, which encourages and reinforces that addiction. Now, let's go back to the dietary recommendations. The American Heart Association guidelines aren't that much different than the USDA's guidelines. The American Heart Association says to choose whole grain carbs instead of refined carbohydrates. Most commercial products that are made with whole grains don't actually contain all that much whole grains. Real whole grain products, like Ezekiel 4:9 breads, which you can find at a lot of health food stores, are possibly better than processed whole grain foods, but there's actually some debate about that because whole grains contain more lectins than processed grains, and lectins are toxic to the body. They're toxic at varying levels, so some people tolerate lectins better than others, but they are a toxin in the body. Now, if we must eat carbs, we're actually better off eating natural carbs, those from whole fruits and vegetables, rather than from grains. Processed grains and pseudo-whole grains, called simple carbs, cause a rapid increase in blood sugar and then a rapid decrease, shown by this blue line here. And this rapid decrease encourages us to eat more carbohydrates. The complex carbohydrates, those from leafy greens and fibrous fruits, can cause a pretty similar rise in glucose. It still goes up pretty high, but it's not quite as extreme. But the crash is slower and more gentle. Now, all carbohydrates are created equal in the body, so they all raise blood sugar. But it's a lot easier to overeat carbohydrates in cake, chips, and bread than it is to overeat broccoli. So let's talk about ultra-processed foods. The distinction between ultra-processed foods and processed foods is important. Dr. Stephen DeVries, who's a preventative cardiologist and the executive director of the Gaples Institute, Chicago, defines ultra-processed foods this way. Ultra-processed foods are industrial creations made with little, if any, whole foods that often contain large amounts of sugar and salt. They are typically infused with artificial colors and additives. These are foods like fatty, sweet, savory, and salty packaged snacks, ice creams, frozen desserts, sodas, and other carbonated or energy sports drinks, canned packaged soups, breads and buns, breakfast cereals and bars, sweetened juices, margarines and spreads, infant formulas and drinks. Yes, I did say infant formulas, and meal replacement shakes. The more processed the food, the less nutrition it has, and the more damage it causes to your body. The brand names in these examples are just examples of brands that fit into this category. There are many, many more in each category. Quite a list, right? In addition to lacking nutrients, many ultra-processed foods have seed oils. Non-dairy creamers are some of the worst. Margarines, cake mixes, ramen or cup of noodles, almost all packaged baked goods, things like Twinkies, etc., donuts, breakfast cereals and bars, cookies, and fast foods. A study through the NIH proved that ultra-processed foods make you hungrier, make you eat more, and make you gain weight. Now, Dr. DeVries says that processed foods are more nutrient dense than ultra-processed foods and are usually less refined and have few or no additives. They are generally healthier than their ultra-processed counterparts. These are foods like freshly made bread, ham, bacon, tinned fish, cheese, fresh or frozen fruits and vegetables without added ingredients, nut butters without seed oils or sugar, nuts and seeds, unsalted and unsweetened, frozen meat, canned fish, canned vegetables without salt, beans, and no salt or low salt broths. Now, the last myth that we want to discuss is that a calorie is a calorie. Now, if we give it some thought, we know how wrong this is from the standpoint of health. It is true that in a chemical equation, energy, and calories are just a form of energy, the energy in must equal energy out in a chemical equation. But it doesn't serve us to think that if we just exercise enough or cut enough calories, we can eat sugar in moderation and still finally lose that weight. I'm not going to deep dive into weight loss here because this is a conversation about nutrition and cancer. But all calories are not created equal in the body. Realistically, 1 calorie from chocolate is the same energy in the body as 1 calorie from a hamburger. But do we think we can eat only chocolate in the right number of calories and expect to be healthy? Of course not. The nutritional value of a hamburger is far superior to the nutritional value of a chocolate. Now, I'm not talking about the bread on top of the hamburger. I'm just talking about the hamburger. To start with, if we ate only chocolate, our body would turn on the hunger hormones because it is not getting what it needs, and it wants nutrients. When we starve the body by eating unnutritional foods, the body stores away the foods that we eat to maybe use them later, but then it ramps up the hunger cues because it doesn't have what it needs. If you are constantly hungry, you don't need more willpower. You need to figure out what nutritional blocks are missing. If the body has enough energy, carbohydrates and fats and protein, but remember, fat and protein are multi-purpose, then hunger is caused by not enough nutrients. So how does this relate to cancer? Well, cancer cells don't use oxygen to grow like the rest of our cells. They use glucose and a substance called glutamine in a fermentation process to grow. What this means is that after all this talk about healthy fats and carbohydrates, is that we can remove carbohydrates from the body, and in so doing, remove one source of fuel that the cancer is using to grow. Now, all major forms of cancer, and many that are not so well known, have been studied by Dr. Seyfried. And he has discovered that all of these types of cancer have unhealthy mitochondria. In order to burn ketones for fuel, you must have healthy mitochondria. So shifting the body into ketosis activates our healthy cells, especially our immune cells who are going to try to help us get rid of the cancer cells, and it starves the cancer cells. Systemic chronic inflammation is the most common cause of mitochondrial damage. I want you to think of it like a fire department trying to put out a kitchen fire. If they're going into the house and the house is tidy and clean, then they can take the hoses right to the kitchen, douse the kitchen, and put out the kitchen fire. But if, however, the fire is in the house of a hoarder, the firefighters have to clear away the debris in order to get to the kitchen. And by the time they get there, if they can even get there, the kitchen is probably gone, and maybe so is the whole house. Inflammation is getting in the way of your body putting out fires in various locations. These fires, if we leave them unchecked, become disease, sometimes even cancers. Dr. Seyfried says that most genetic mutations happen because of the cancer, not that the cancer happens because of the mutations. And those genetic mutations happen because of the toxins spit out by dysfunctional mitochondria. Now, we can remove glucose, but we can't remove glutamine permanently. Dr. Seyfried uses what he calls a pulse method to suppress glutamine once a person or a patient is in therapeutic ketosis. This kills the cancer cells because the cancer cells can't use ketones. But since the body is adapted to using ketones, which is what he means by therapeutic ketosis, the body doesn't need the glucose and the healthy cells are just fine. However, if you suppressed glutamine forever, all of your cells need glutamine and you would cause problems in the body. Suppressing it in the short term basically puts your regular cells to sleep, and then you wake them back up and you add glutamine back in the body. In addition, killing the cancer cells too fast causes an overwhelming, causes your body to be overwhelmed with the toxins from the carcasses of the dead cancer cells. So this pulse method suppresses glutamine for a short time, allowing cancer cell death. But because it's a short time, it doesn't overwhelm the immune system with detritus. So we suppress for a while, and then we stop and we give the immune system a chance to clean out the dead cancer cells, and then we do it again. Also, long-term water-only fasting will lower glutamine and glucose simultaneously. Fasting for 24 hours before a chemo session and 24 hours after a chemo session has been shown to reduce tumor size substantially, as well as to reduce the side effects of the chemo itself. But fasting without the body being conditioned to use ketones for fuel can be highly unpleasant, and in some cases even dangerous. Fasting seems to increase a protein called p53, which are proteins that limit cell division. And it also seems to increase the gateways in the cells that allow the chemo to get into the cancer cells. So taking both chemo and fasting together can actually speed up cancer tumor regression by a lot. Many oncologists suggest to patients that during treatment, especially during chemo, you should eat whatever that you can keep down in order to keep up your weight. However, most often that food is sugar, and sugar feeds the cancer, making your treatment less effective. A better strategy is to deny the cancer the food it needs by training your body to be in ketosis. You get into ketosis by eliminating carbohydrates and sugars from your diet. Don't just eat low-fat protein, though, because your body will break the protein down and turn it into sugar, if it must. Be sure you eat plenty of healthy fats. These fats are what your body will turn into energy. Once your body can use fat from your diet, it will know how to convert fat into ketones. And when you fast, it will do exactly that. An interesting fact, if you have breast cancer and are taking tamoxifen, it is only effective against tumors when there is normal levels of nighttime melatonin in the blood. Researcher David Blask explains the mechanism this way. He says that high melatonin levels at night put breast cancer cells to sleep by turning off key growth mechanisms. These cells are vulnerable to tamoxifen. But when the lights are on and melatonin is suppressed, breast cancer cells wake up and ignore the tamoxifen. Night lights, televisions, and even light coming in through a window have been shown to reduce melatonin production. The researchers advise at least 8 hours of total darkness per day to encourage adequate melatonin production. Unfortunately, the FDA has not put any recommendations as to what time of day tamoxifen should be administered, and there's no research yet on using melatonin supplements. But we do know that a healthy circadian rhythm produces appropriate amounts of melatonin, which enhance tamoxifen treatments. This is part of what I do as an FDNP. I help people reset their body's hormones, including their circadian rhythm, so that they can get quality sleep and their bodies can heal. So now what? That was depressing. Big food is out to get us. Government and nonprofits are supposed to watch out for us, but they're heavily influenced by funding from big food and big ag, or they just don't know things to tell us to help us with our nutrition. So where do we go now? How do we navigate this? Well, the ideal way is to change your diet to a ketogenic diet, severely limiting or completely devoid of carbohydrates of all forms, but plentiful in proteins and healthy fats. If eliminating carbs is not something that you're willing to do, at least eat only nutrient-dense and necessary food by eating the outside of the grocery store. Skip the bread aisle, though. Pay attention to how you feel after you eat. Food should make you feel good both when you eat it and 1 to 2 hours after you eat it. If you're starving, you're bloated, you're gassy, you're lethargic, you're anxious, or you have other symptoms in that realm 1 to 2 hours after you eat, then your food was actually hurting you, not helping you. Along the same lines, don't force yourself to eat plant matter that you don't like. There's 2 reasons for that. First, evolution places restrictions on the amount of plant matter we can process. It's determined by the colon's capacity to process fiber. Per Dr. Anita Tagore, plant foods have lower levels of nutrients than animal foods do, and they also impede the absorption of nutrients from animal foods. It's possible that your colon just can't handle more plants at the time if you're not craving those vegetables. Fatty meat, higher in calories, vitamins, minerals, it has no toxic substances, no anti-nutrients, and it's easier to chew and digest than plants. So as long as you're eating all your fatty meat, don't feel like you must clean your plate. Plants are not required to be healthy. On a side note, I love my doctor and I have incredible respect for her, but she and other doctors usually shouldn't be dispensing nutritional advice. Very few doctors are trained in nutrition. Most of them get less than an hour of nutrition classes in their whole medical school program, and many of them don't even get an hour. In addition, many dietetics schools are funded by big food companies who are determined to keep government subsidies that allow them to grow more plants. Now, I know this point is controversial, and if you're interested, please post in the comments below, and I would be happy to share my references for my claims. Like I said, plants are not required for healthy people. Second, it is common for our bodies to dislike certain foods because those foods cause our own bodies distress, and we know that intuitively. I often find this is true when I test for food sensitivities. Most people who have a food or two that they don't actually like have a sensitivity to it. Again, pay attention to how you feel 2 to 3 hours after you eat, 1 to 2 to 3 hours after you eat, to know if the food was good for you. Or at least you should know if it was bad for you if you don't feel good. Okay, so healthy foods. They are quite simple, even if they're not quite as easy. So where do we begin? Well, first, like I said, shop the outside of the grocery store. The meat section, the dairy and fruits and vegetables sections, and maybe detour down the frozen produce section. Don't fear fat. Add lots of healthy fats to your diet. Be liberal with the butter, but sparing with the mayonnaise and processed peanut butter. 3, increase your protein intake. Women under 5 feet tall need 55 to 80 grams of protein a day, and men 5 feet 4 and shorter should get 65 to 90 grams of protein a day. These numbers get bigger the taller that we get, and most adults don't even get close to this number, let alone the numbers for their height. Now, I am not a big fan of counting macros. If healthy eating is too much work, we won't sustain it. But as a reference point, you should be eating 1 gram per 1 pound of body weight in protein. That means that a 150-pound adult should be eating 4.5 cans of tuna, 5 chicken breasts, or 25 eggs a day. Now, obviously, eating 25 eggs a day doesn't really sound that appealing, but the idea here is to just show you quantities. Are you eating enough protein? Remember, you can mix and match your protein too, so it doesn't have to be all of one kind, but again, these are just examples of quantities. As a society, we are not eating enough protein. Now wait, you say, isn't high protein hard on the kidneys? No. Well, actually, if you have kidney disease already, then maybe. But if you are healthy, it is perfectly okay for you to eat lots and lots of protein. So now let's talk about fat. You should be eating no less than 0.3 grams per pound of body weight in healthy fats. That means adding 3.5 tablespoons of butter or extra virgin olive oil to your meals throughout the day. Now, a good rule of thumb with eating fats is continue to eat fat until it doesn't taste good. Your body will tell you when you've had enough fat in your diet. So remember that animal fats are the best because they have the perfect ratio of the different types of fats in the body. But if we must go to plants, go to coconut oil or to extra virgin olive oil. The only way to make sure that olive oil has not been adulterated, which means mixed with seed oils, is to get extra virgin olive oil. 69 to 73% of groceries, stores, and restaurants have olive oils in the US that are adulterated, per the IOC's sensory standards for extra virgin olive oil. Buy olive oil in a dark glass container or encased in a box and keep it in a dark cupboard to keep it from oxidizing too fast, because light speeds up oxidation. What about nuts, you say? They have fats. Well, nuts are high in linoleic acid too, which, aside from being the wrong ratio, also oxidizes really well. Some nuts are probably fine, but try to eat nuts with a lower linoleic acid content, and I would not make nuts your primary source of fat. So continuing on our list of ways to get started, 4, learn to read the labels. Ingredients on the labels are listed in quantity order, which means the first thing on the list was used in the greatest quantity in making that product. The second thing on the list was used in the second greatest quantity, and so on. As a rule of thumb, if you can't pronounce more than 1 or 2 ingredients on the label, you probably shouldn't be putting that in your mouth because it's probably not really food. 5th, restrict sugar as much as you can. Remember, sugar is toxic, but our culture is addicted to it, and cancer loves that addiction. Because it is an addiction, reducing the quantity of sugar can cause withdrawal symptoms, just as if you were addicted to cocaine. In fact, sugar has been shown to be more addictive than cocaine. So what should we eat? Well, again, go to the outside of the grocery store as much as possible. Buy frozen fruits and vegetables, organic when possible, with nothing else on the label but that specific food. Frozen foods have a higher nutrient density as they're picked, ripe, and flash frozen. Did you know that fresh picked spinach has 100% of its vitamin C when it's picked, but a week later at the grocery store, it can have 0 vitamin C? Once a fruit or vegetable has been harvested, every day off the vine or out of the soil means nutrient decline. And the average piece of food in America travels 1,500 miles to reach our plates, losing valuable nutrients along the way. Another trick is to buy good meat in bulk if possible. Obo's, a local store here, will give a great discount if you're willing to buy in bulk and package on your own. And I'm sure many other meat markets will do that as well. We buy tri-tips and flank steaks by the case and freeze them individually at home. We get a great discount on 70-30 or 75-25 burger if our butcher doesn't have to package it in 1 or 2 pound packages. And bacon and sausage by the case are cheaper too. Also, check your area for local ranchers who will sell you half a beef or a whole beef if you have the room. You can buy wild-caught canned fish like salmon instead of fresh fish in order to save money. Wild-caught is much healthier than farm-raised, has much fewer toxins. Eggs, most of the time, are an inexpensive way to get extremely nutrient-dense food. Hard-boil them, scramble them, fry them. These are all good ways to get great nutrients out of eggs. And eggs are a complete source of protein that contain all the essential amino acids that we need. Excuse me. Protein powders can be a great way to supplement protein as well. But be sure that you're choosing organic and grass-fed or regenerative farm if you're using an animal-based protein. Be sure that it has minimal ingredients, no added sugars, no colorings, no natural or artificial flavors, no gums, or no ingredients that you aren't familiar with. I like to mix protein powder into a cup of unsweetened yogurt. It gives me a boost of protein and lets me eat yogurt without all the sugar and the extra gunk in the yogurt. If you're a bean or lentil person, buy those in bulk and cook them in large batches in a slow cooker. Buy your nuts in bulk and buy them raw, and if possible, toast them yourselves in beef tallow, pork lard, or butter. Or if you don't want to cook your nuts, just be sure the ones you buy weren't roasted in seed oils. Almonds with dark chocolate bits can be a tasty snack too. Cheese sticks are a good snack. Pepperoni with cream cheese. High-fat, energy-dense foods include bacon or bacon-wrapped pickles, full-fat yogurt with protein powder mixed in, full-fat cheese, eggs, sausages, and 70% ground beef. So processing. Much of what we eat, especially in rural communities, is processed food. We rarely kill and eat it right there or pick and eat it right in the garden. So when you're choosing foods, try to get the least processed foods that you can. They're always on a continuum. Are pepperoni and sausage processed? You bet they are. Are they worse than crackers? Not on your life. Research has shown that while processed meats are less healthy than cut meats like a roast or steak, they are worlds more healthy than ultra-processed foods. My family chooses to have them in our diet for variety in our diet and because they are more healthy than other alternatives. So that was a lot. The best advice I can give you is to just start somewhere. Pick one or two things and work to improve your diet and the nutrition in the lives of your family. Maybe say, as a family, we aren't drinking sugar at home anymore. Or maybe you want to start with no sugar or processed carbohydrates in our snacks. Maybe you want to start by switching out your fats, getting rid of vegetable oils when you cook and switching to animal fats. Maybe you want to stop eating seed oils and processed foods. This is a much bigger bite than you might think. Maybe these are too big and you want to just start with no sugar at breakfast every day and work up to cutting out sugar or drastically reducing sugar over the next few months. Maybe just start by adding more protein. When I was working to improve my intestinal health 2.5 years ago, I started by making more of my plate healthy proteins and healthy fats, and slowly I stopped eating the things that I was learning weren't any good for me. As my body became adapted to using fat that is always just present in everybody, I began to feel so much better. I had to fast 36 hours recently for a medical procedure, and I never once got hangry during that 36-hour fast, and I guarantee that would not have happened 3 years ago. Yes, I got hungry, but not like I expected. I didn't have the shakes or the jitters. I wasn't as irritable as I used to be. I was just hungry. So take this information and start somewhere. So remember, if you would like a copy of it's 10 recipes, 5 breakfast, 5 dinner recipes to start adjusting to some of the things we discussed about today. Send me a DM with your email address and I will get that over to you. If you're willing to, if you have a brief testimonial, I would love you to put that in the comments below. Would just help me get the word out. And here is some information on how to get a hold of me. Thanks so much.